1. Opening. When firewood fails, history speaks. When firewood disappears, most people imagine the end of warmth, the end of cooking, and the end of survival itself. Yet history whispers a different story. Because every time forests thinned, storms soaked the last dry log, or the land simply offered nothing to burn, people did not freeze. They adapted. They engineered. They discovered heat in places modern minds never bother to look. And the truth they left behind is simple, shocking, and more relevant to today than any modern survival manual dares to admit. Pause for a moment and consider this. In the past, entire communities lived through winters with almost no firewood. They stayed warm not by burning more, but by understanding heat better than we do now. Their secrets still work, and they require no technology, no fuel delivery, and no electricity. Just knowledge. So stay with me, because what you're about to learn can turn the weakest shelter into a warm haven, even when the last stick of wood is gone. History is not a museum. It is a manual. And today, it opens to a page most of us have forgotten. 2. The great misconception: fire is not heat. Modern people make one critical mistake. We believe fire equals heat. But to our ancestors, fire was only the beginning, never the solution. What truly kept them alive was heat itself, captured, guided, slowed, and stored long after the flame faded. Fire is violent, brief, and wasteful. Heat, on the other hand, is loyal if you know how to command it. Ancient builders understood something we rarely think about. Flames are expensive. They consume fuel, energy, and time. They expose you with smoke, drain your strength through constant feeding, and vanish the moment you stop working. But heat behaves differently. It moves. It lingers. It hides inside stone, clay, and packed earth. It seeps through walls and settles under floors. It becomes a quiet partner, warming the room long after the source of flame has died. This simple shift in thinking, fire for ignition, heat for survival, was the foundation of every forgotten heating system across the ancient world. And once you understand it, your entire view of warmth changes forever. You stop fighting the cold. You start teaching heat where to go. 3. Stone, earth, and clay. The first energy batteries long before electricity and insulated homes, the world's oldest civilizations discovered the most reliable energy storage system in human history: thermal mass. Not batteries, not wires, but stone, earth, and clay. These were the true engines of winter survival. They did not burn. They did not break. They simply absorbed heat slowly and released it faithfully. Picture this. A small fire burns for an hour. Flames leap, crackle, then die. But the thick bench behind that fire stays warm deep into the night. The floor beneath your feet radiates a steady, gentle heat until sunrise. Some homes even stayed warm for an entire day after a single morning burn. These were not miracles. They were designs, intentional, brilliant designs, built by people who understood that the body tires long before the cold does. Thermal mass was not luxury, it was protection. Families used stone walls as shields against hunger and frostbite. Travelers slept against sun-warmed boulders to survive desert nights. Farmers packed earth into home foundations because it held heat better than wood. Every culture discovered the same principle in its own way. Warmth stored slowly is worth more than warmth burned quickly. And here's the lesson we can still use today. If you ever face a winter storm, a blackout, or a supply shortage, you don't need endless firewood. You need mass, dense, heavy materials that can hold heat after the flame dies. Even a thick brick wall beside a tiny stove can stretch your fuel and raise your chances of staying warm when everything else fails. Thermal mass is not ancient, it's timeless, and it waits quietly for anyone who knows how to use it. 4. Heat without flame. The art of guided warmth. Once ancient people understood that heat mattered more than flame, they began shaping it with purpose. Instead of letting warmth fade into the air, they captured it, channeled it, and delivered it exactly where it was needed. This was not magic. It was engineering, the kind of engineering done with bare hands, simple tools, and an intimate understanding of the land. Imagine a shelter where the fire sits far from the sleeping area, yet the bed stays warm. This was achieved by building hidden channels under the floor, narrow pathways that guided warm air or warm smoke through packed earth. As the heat traveled, the floor absorbed it, storing the warmth and releasing it long after the fire died. In some regions, entire villages slept on raised platforms connected to these channels, transforming freezing nights into bearable ones with only a handful of fuel. Guided heat was also a matter of safety. Flames inside a shelter risked suffocation, structural fire, and constant smoke exposure. But by moving the flame away and letting only the warmth enter the living space, ancient builders removed the danger while keeping the benefit. The result was silent, steady heat. Heat that left no smoke trail, no bright glow to reveal a family's location, and no need for constant tending. This was the genius of guided warmth. It allowed a single fire to heat multiple rooms, eliminated waste, and protected the people who depended on it. Today, the principle remains powerful. Whether you live in a cabin or a modern home, you can still guide heat through stone benches, brick walls, and insulated channels. Instead of feeding the fire endlessly, you teach the warmth to stay longer and reach farther. 5. Sun as fuel. When fire was optional long before solar panels and modern science, ancient societies relied on the sun as a dependable daily source of heat. They did not call it renewable energy or passive design. They simply understood that the sun rose every day, burned without cost, and delivered heat to anyone wise enough to capture it. For them, sunlight was not decoration, it was survival. Across the world, builders oriented their shelters with a precision many modern architects ignore. South-facing walls were darkened with soot or covered in stone to absorb maximum heat during the day. Roofs were angled not for beauty, but to block winter winds and prevent heat loss. Even the size and placement of windows followed a survival logic. Small openings to trap warmth, wide sills to gather light, and deep frames to reduce drafts. In colder climates, the sun's contribution mattered even more. A single day of winter sunlight could raise the temperature of a stone wall enough to release gentle warmth into the night. Farmers planted windbreaks around their homes, turning their fields into solar funnels. Meanwhile, desert cultures built homes partially underground, using the earth to stabilize temperature while letting the surface absorb the sun. The lesson is simple and powerful. Heat does not always require flame. Sometimes it requires nothing more than positioning, timing, and an understanding of how the land receives the sun. In any crisis, the sun becomes your first fuel, silent, predictable, and completely free. And when your shelter works with the sun instead of against it, you burn less, save more, and stay warm even when every fire has gone out. 6. Heat from decay. Biological energy systems. Nature has its own furnace, and it burns without flame. When organic matter breaks down, leaves, straw, manure, food scraps, it produces heat. Not a gentle warmth, but temperatures high enough to melt frost, warm water, and even keep greenhouses alive through brutal winters. Ancient farmers knew this intimately. To them, decomposition was not waste, it was energy. They built compost walls around sleeping quarters and animal shelters, allowing the slow, steady heat of decay to radiate inward. They buried water jars inside piles of straw and manure, letting the natural fermentation raise the temperature for cooking, cleaning, and bathing. In colder regions, they grew vegetables through the dead of winter simply by placing compost trenches beneath planting beds. The heat rose upward, keeping roots alive while snow piled deep on the roof. What made biological heat so valuable was its reliability. Wood could rot, crops could fail, but decomposition never stopped. As long as life existed, decay followed, and with decay came warmth. This system demanded no cutting, no hauling, and no dangerous open flames. It required only patience, moisture, and a steady supply of organic matter, resources every community produced naturally. Even today, you can harness this ancient system with little effort. A compost pile placed against an exterior wall can raise indoor temperatures. A trench filled with decomposing plant material can warm a garden bed. And in true emergencies, tightly packed organic matter can protect stored water from freezing. The heat of decay is slow, constant, and renewable, proof that fire is not the only engine nature provides. 7. Fuel was never just wood across the ancient world. Wood was precious, but rarely abundant enough to rely on. And in many regions, it was almost non-existent. Civilizations born in grasslands, marshes, deserts, and treeless highlands learned something modern people forget. Fire does not care what it burns. It only cares that the fuel is dry, dense, and prepared with intention. For thousands of years, people fueled their lives with grasses twisted into tight ropes, reeds bundled into dense sheaves, and crop residues saved from the harvest. In places where animals roamed, dung was shaped into bricks and dried beneath the sun. These bricks burned slowly and steadily, producing long, even heat without requiring forests that didn't exist. Then there was peat, the forgotten giant of ancient fuel. Cut from bogs, dried in the wind, and stacked like miniature towers, peat powered entire communities through winters that swallowed the horizon. It burned cleaner than wet wood, longer than straw, and steadier than brush. In some villages, the sight of peat stacks rising beside a home was the only sign of wealth that truly mattered. Over time, every culture developed its own fuel logic. Corn cobs burned bright and clean. Residues from hemp, flax, or millet provided bursts of heat ideal for cooking. Even discarded plant fibers from old weaving looms found their way into the fire. Nothing was waste if it could burn, and nothing was taken for granted. And today, these forgotten fuels still matter. In an emergency, the fields surrounding your home, the reeds near a pond, or even the waste from your own animals can become valuable sources of heat. The world is full of combustible resources. Most people just stopped noticing them. 8. Cooking without burning. Time as energy. Ancient cooking was never a battle against fuel. It was a dance with time. Instead of forcing flame after flame beneath a pot, people learned to use the initial burst of heat as a catalyst, not a constant requirement. Once food reached a boil, the work of the fire was done. From that point on, insulation took over and time finished the meal. This is where haybox cooking emerged, one of the simplest and most brilliant techniques ever created. A pot was brought to a boil, then immediately buried in hay, straw, cloth, or earth. The insulation trapped the heat so effectively that the food continued to cook for hours without another spark of flame. Families could leave to work the fields, return at dusk, and find a fully cooked meal waiting for them. Other methods followed the same logic. Clay ovens heated once in the morning could bake all day. Pits dug into the ground held warmth long after the fire was removed. Even sun-dried foods, preserved without fuel, showed that heat could be used gently and gradually instead of violently and wastefully. What mattered most was control, not intensity. Slow heat softened grains, tenderized root vegetables, and purified water with remarkable efficiency. The ancients did not waste energy. They partnered with it. They realized that heat lingers if you protect it, and that gentleness can sometimes achieve more than force. For anyone living off-grid, or simply preparing for hard times, this lesson remains powerful. Protect the heat you create. Do not spend more energy keeping a flame alive when the warmth you already generated is enough. Just as thermal mass stores warmth for shelters, insulation stores warmth for food. And in both cases, time becomes one of the most dependable fuels you have. 9. The multi-layer survival model. Ancient societies did not trust a single solution. They survived by building layers, redundant, overlapping systems that worked together to protect life. One layer might fail, but the others endured. This mindset created some of the most resilient heating strategies the world has ever seen. The first layer was sunlight. Every shelter faced the sun with purpose, harvesting free heat each day. The second layer was thermal mass, stone, earth, and clay that stored warmth long into the night. The third layer was biological heat, the slow fire of decomposition that never stopped burning. The fourth consisted of alternative fuels, gathered through the seasons and stored for months. And only at the final layer, the outermost ring of survival, did families rely on wood or open flame. This structure was not an accident. It was a strategy born from centuries of hardship. Droughts, storms, failed harvests, frozen rivers. Every crisis taught the same lesson: never depend on a single lifeline. The more layers a family built, the less likely they were to freeze or starve. And even when disaster struck, there was always a way to produce warmth, even if the usual methods vanished. Modern life quietly removed these layers. We replaced them with switches, thermostats, and single points of failure. But history shows that resilience comes from diversity, not convenience. In any long-term emergency, the people who endure are the ones who rebuild these layers. Combining sun, mass, decay, and alternative fuels, into a silent network of safety. When you understand the multi-layer model, you stop thinking of heat as a single source. You begin to see it as a web, an ecosystem, where each piece strengthens the next. And once the web is built, cold becomes far less dangerous than it appears. 10. Why modern humans forgot this. Somewhere along the path of progress, we lost our relationship with heat. Not the comfort of warmth, but the understanding of how warmth actually works. When fossil fuels arrived, when electricity lit the night, and when thermostats took the place of design and discipline, humanity quietly abandoned tens of thousands of years of knowledge. We traded wisdom for convenience, and convenience made us forget the fragility of the systems we rely on. Today, most people cannot explain how their home stays warm. They cannot name the fuel that heats their water. They do not know the direction their house faces or how much heat a wall can store. Our ancestors would find this astonishing, because to them, heat literacy was survival literacy. Without it, winter was not an inconvenience. It was a threat. And because technology insulated us from consequence, we adopted a dangerous illusion: the belief that energy is always available, always instant, and always external. But history proves otherwise. A single failure, an outage, a storm, a supply chain disruption, is enough to reveal how shallow our understanding has become. The ancients built their heat systems into the land, into the walls, into the habits of daily life. Modern humans built theirs into a grid of wires and fuel lines. When the grid falls silent, the difference becomes painfully clear. The past did not disappear. We simply stopped listening to it. 11. Conclusion: heat never left. When firewood runs out, most people imagine the end of warmth. But history shows the opposite. Heat continues to exist. In stone, in sunlight, in soil, in the slow fire of decomposition, and in the overlooked fuels scattered across the natural world. Firewood was never the heart of survival. Knowledge was. Ancient families stayed warm because they designed their shelters to hold sunlight. They built walls that inhaled heat during the day and exhaled it at night. They harnessed biological warmth, saved every scrap of burnable material, and depended on fire only when all else was exhausted. Their strength was not brute force. It was foresight. Even today, these methods work with astonishing effectiveness. A sun-oriented wall, a mass of dense stone, a compost trench, a stove backed by brick, each one adds a layer of protection that requires no power, no modern fuel, and no endless labor. The moment you rebuild these layers, you no longer fear running out of wood because your heat comes from more than one source. And this is the final lesson. Survival has never belonged to those who burn the fastest. It belongs to those who understand how heat behaves, who prepare before the storm arrives, and who respect the quiet forces that warm a shelter long after the fire is gone. Heat never left. We simply forgot how to find it.